Pranayama is rung 4, limb number 4 of the 8 rungs or limbs of Ashtanga. Pranayama. Pranayama has to do with the regulation of energy. Very commonly, pranayama is viewed as only simply being breathing practices. But there's some tremendous subtleties here in terms of traditional Ashtanga Yoga, and they are very important to understand and very important to practice. One of the principles is that there, in breath, we all know this already, there is inhalation. We all inhale and we exhale. And when we are breathing, it is not only the mechanical act of lungs moving and muscles moving to move the lungs. That's part of breathing. But there's actually, this is where the word prana comes from, that there is a life force or an energy called prana that's moving. So we have inhalation and we have inhalation and we have exhalation. But there's something else that we have, and that's the transition between the two. It's very subtle and mostly is unnoticed, and often when we talk about pranayama, often it's just not even mentioned. But it's very important, be aware of this, that in the transition between inhalation and exhalation, or between exhalation and inhalation, there is no longer, this sounds obvious, but there is no longer inhalation and there is no longer exhalation. Neither one of those are there in the moment of the transition. If you think of driving your car, you're driving a car down the road and you're coming up to a stop sign or a traffic light that's out there in the distance in front of you. One of the ways you can stop for that stop sign or the traffic light is you can just be going, your foot is on the gas, you're driving. Sometimes you see people drive like this and all of a sudden take their foot, they wait till the last minute, the last few seconds, and take the foot off the gas pedal and jam it onto the brake, and the car goes doo-doo-doo and stops abruptly, quickly. That's one way of stopping the car. There's another way of stopping the car for the stop sign or the traffic light that is much gentler, and this is what the yogi does. The braking starts not by standing on the brake pedal, but by releasing your effort on the gas pedal. And the car naturally starts to slow down as it's coming to the traffic light. This is what we're doing with pranayama. This is actually the subtler meaning of pranayama. The Sanskrit word doesn't matter, but it can be viewed as this style of breaking, B-R-A-K-I-G, not breaking in two. But it's the reducing of effort. Remember in the last, when we talked about asana, there was the principle of loosening of effort. That loosening of effort is done here in pranayama too. So there's a very gentle decision behind inhalation and exhalation. We're just breathing. I'm inhaling and I'm exhaling. But there is an impetus behind that. We don't think of it usually as effort, but there is an impetus behind that. Some part of us internally is saying, bring air in. Some part of us internally is saying, let air out. There's an impetus behind it. And what we are doing is we are braking, not by putting our foot on the brake pedal to stop the car, but by refraining or lessening or loosening of the effort that is going into the gas pedal. So the exertion that's going into exhalation and the exertion that's going into inhalation, we're reducing that effort. And it's in that spirit that we can call it breaking, of pausing and causing ourselves to no longer to do exhalation and inhalation. But the way in which we experience that, as we're out here starting to do these practices, the way we experience it is as the transition between inhalation and exhalation, and the transition between exhalation and inhalation. And so then what we discover there is that's where we can actually gradually, slowly over time, discover the prana itself. Because most of the time, the prana, the energy, is busy exerting itself as exhalation or exerting itself as inhalation. When you allow yourself to realize that there's a transition between them where there is no such exertion, that's where you have the possibility of discovering prana itself. And that is the meaning of pranayama. Now, I mentioned that there's exhalation and there's inhalation and the transition. So that's three aspects in this Rung 4. There are three aspects of pranayama. There's inhalation, exhalation, and transition. And in the transition is where we can actually discover the prana itself. There's a fourth pranayama. This is what the pranayama practice in this Rung is really all about. Now notice the word four is being used here in two different ways. One is that pranayama, the practice of pranayama, is the fourth of the 8 rungs. It's just coincidence, so to speak, that it's number 4, and here we are talking about there's a fourth pranayama. It's just coincidence that the number 4. There's no connection between those two usages of the number 4. So now to go on, there's inhalation, exhalation, transition, and then there is the fourth pranayama. And the fourth pranayama is the awareness of prana itself. What is prana? Prana is that life energy, sometimes called life force. There's inhalation, there's exhalation, there's effort going into those. We're not much aware of it usually, but there's an impetus behind inhalation, there's an impetus behind exhalation, and then there's a transition. And between those two, in that transition, there's no longer an applying of that impetus. There we can discover prana, and there is no inhalation, there is no exhalation, and that allows us to discover the fourth pranayama, the prana itself. And from that we discover that aspect of prana is actually functioning all the time. The background is that prana, that life force itself, is there when we're inhaling, it's there when we're exhaling, and it's there when we're in the transition between the two. That's the ultimate pranayama. Here's a little story that will help give a feeling like that. If you go out in the ocean in a boat, and you jump off the side of the boat and you're swimming around in the ocean, you're bobbing up, you're going up and you're going down, you're rising and falling with the waves. Imagine that it's gentle waves. It's not a storm. There's no storm. There's not rough waves. You're just gently flowing with the rising and falling of the current of the ocean, the waves as they move through. You go up and you go down. Now imagine for a moment that you put scuba tanks on your back, and you put the breather thing here, and you have your mask on, and you go off the edge of the boat, and you go down, glub, 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 and you go down and you sit on the bottom of the ocean. It's not too deep. Maybe it's, 100 feet or 50 feet or 20 feet or 30 feet. If you've ever done scuba diving, you know what it's like. You can be down there, and from that depth, if the water is clear, you can look up above you and you can see the boat up there, and the boat is still rising and falling with the movement of the current of the water. But you are now sitting on the bottom. Maybe you've got some weights on scuba dives. Sometimes you use weights to hold you down. And so there you are. You're sitting down there gently on the bottom of the ocean. You see the boat up there. You can see the boat move. Maybe you can see the waves. You can actually see the white cap, the white part of the waves. You can see it rising and falling up there. That's where the breathing is going on. But now you're sitting on the bottom. And where you're sitting on the bottom with your scuba tanks on, you feel no motion whatsoever. There is no rising, transitioning, and falling. The wave, when the wave in the ocean, it rises, it pauses for a moment, transitions, and comes back down. and then it pauses for a moment, transition, and the wave rises back up again. This is the way waves in an ocean work. And so when you're in the boat, you can feel that happening. If you step out of the boat and you're floating there, you can feel it. You can feel rise, transition, fall, transition, rise. That's what we're doing with breath, inhaling and exhaling. And then when you're sitting on the bottom, there is no rising, transitioning, and falling. There's just the ocean. And this is the spirit of the fourth pranayama. And that's what we're really trying to do with pranayama, is to experience that aspect of prana. It is built upon the yamas and the niyamas and the ability to do the asana, Rung 3, the way we were talking about, expanding awareness and moving past the pairs of opposites of pain and pleasure and satisfaction and dissatisfaction. Now you can actually have the opportunity to do this pranayama and to be aware of just being sitting in the ocean of prana. And at that moment you have started to move beyond the pairs of opposites, and it sets the stage now for concentration itself. This pranayama, this awareness, this level of awareness of prana itself is now preparation for concentration. A fascinating thing happens with this, and I'll talk about this more in the next talk, which is on pratyahara. But pratyahara is Rung 5. The description of pranayama that I just mentioned to you ends by saying that it's preparation for Rung number 6. There's a real beautiful subtlety that I'll talk more about, but that it sort of leaps you right over Rung number 5. So Rung number 5 kind of magically happens as Rung number 4, the pranayama, the way we're talking about here. This pranayama, which is Rung number 4, and specifically the fourth pranayama that is part of Rung 4, prepares you. It catapults you, so to speak. It just leapfrogs you over to the one on concentration, which is Rung number 6. Beautiful simplicity of that. The other thing that happens with this aspect of pranayama is the fancy words that are that it thins the veil over the karma-shaya. What is the karma-shaya? The karma-shaya simply means the field in which, like a farmer's field, the field in which are growing all of my karmas, all of my samskaras, all of my attractions, all of my aversions, all of my fears are growing in a field of the deep, deep unconscious. They're growing there. And this pranayama thins the veil that is covering over that field of karma. We'll talk about this much later, and when we get into the last section of the course, we'll talk more about this field and this purifying process of the deepest levels of our habit patterns. But here it's saying that this pranayama has the effect of starting to thin that veil that is covering over that field of karmas. And so by the remainder of the rungs, we gain the ability to introspect that field of karmas and to so to speak, burn them up so that those habit patterns and false identities are no longer an obstacle. And that leads to, remember we talked about nirodha, the setting aside of all the false identity, and then the drashtu, the seer can rest in its true nature, which is where we're ultimately going with all of this. And so this pranayama cannot really successfully be done without some reasonable integration of the yamas and the niyamas, and it sets the stage to be able to do the other rungs. And this opens the door to the possibility, because of thinning the veil over the field of samskaras, of the karma shaya, it sets the stage to be able to then experience the highest level of outcome from doing these 8 rungs. And so this again is what pranayama is about, which is the 4th of the 8 rungs of traditional Ashtanga Yoga. And please, once again, hold this lightly. Remember, we said this much earlier on. You do this practice for a long time with the right attitude and without a break. Steady, 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 gently, 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 loving to yourself, not beating up on yourself. But take it in and just remember, Rung 4 is about pranayama.